everyone. I'd like to welcome our esteemed panelists today. We have a father-daughter combination today, which is really, really neat. So, ladies first, we have Muskan Bansal, and we have Vinay Bansal as well joining us. Thank you very, very much. I'm going to try and do them justice and introduce them. So let me start off. Uh, with Muskan. So you read your bio here. You're a biomedical researcher at Center for Study of Biological Complexity at the Virginia Commonwealth University. You're an undergraduate biomedical researcher with avid interest in data privacy and regulation. Her current research focus is in image processing and recognition of biological samples and genomic data analytics, where she gets firsthand experience of the need of cybersecurity in handling biological data. Previously, she was a research analyst for the EHR 2.0 and developed a security and privacy control risk assessment checklist for medical offices to help achieve compliance of HIPAA and GDPR. In 2018, she wrote a research paper on the impacts medical researchers face with the changing data privacy regulations being enacted by the European Union. Muskan is currently completing her Bachelor of Sciences and Master's in Bioinformatics at Virginia Commonwealth University. She intends to pursue an MD degree and hopes to progress biomedical innovation. So fantastic, fantastic. And your father, let me move your bio here so you can look forward. Vinay is a principal engineer in Cisco System Security and Trust Organization, InfoSec. He leads the cloud monitoring program for Cisco's Incident Command Team. His current focus is securing Cisco's cloud adoption in public and private clouds, AWS, Azure, GCP, and working with various Cisco teams building secure cloud products. Prior to Cisco, Vinay has worked at various Fortune 500 companies, including IBM, AT&T, Nokia, Experian, and Plessey Telecom in the UK. Vinay holds a master's degree in computer science from Duke University. All right. So thank you very, very much. Again, let's clap in the chat for our panelists. And again, our topic today is cyber biosecurity, protecting biomedical and patient data in the cloud. So I give it to you to wow us with your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jared, for such a great introduction. Yeah, let's hop right in. Really looking at what cyber biosecurity is and why it's really important to protect patient and biomedical data in the cloud. So kind of an introduction of what's going to be covered today. We're really going to take time to understand what the growing field of cyber biosecurity really is. We're going to break down three areas: health systems, medical devices, and bioinformatics research in the cloud. And then, excuse me, we're going to look at the vulnerabilities, risks, and then even mitigations that we have within these three certain fields. So on our agenda today, really, we're going to, again, break down cyber biosecurity. We're going to go through EHR, which is electronic health records and medical devices, as well as an architectural map of the threats for these areas. We're going to look at then bioinformatics and genomics research, again, look at an architectural map, and then end with kind of the risks, mitigations, and controls that we have in this area. So what is cyber biosecurity? Cyber biosecurity essentially is the cybersecurity of biological domains as well as biological fields right now. And so really what's happening in biology is that we're seeing an increase of growth in the economy for biologists and with the rapid increase of technology. And so it's really important to keep the security in both these areas really compact and make sure that that's a really good secure system. Otherwise, we're having a lot of risks right now. And so I want to kind of project this into what's actually happening in the status quo with the quick nexus. So what we really see is an advancement in biological research in the last 15, 20 years. And cloud, which is providing us a very cheap computing power to be able to do a lot of our research, is really increasing. But with that, we have an increase of regulations that we need to keep in mind, both as researchers and actual computational providers in the cloud, as well as a lot more medical and research breaches that we're going to really talk about in today's presentation. So we're looking at three big areas. As I said, we're looking at patient health, specifically in the EHR. We're going to talk about a few IoT devices and medical devices, and then we're also going to look at the life sciences industry with biology and genomic research. So let's dive into EHR systems and medical devices. So what is an electronic health record system? Essentially, electronic health record systems are made for us to be able to store patient data as well as patient information into a system online that can essentially be shared with anybody in the hospital. But really, we also built an EHR system to automate and streamline the process for providers. And so information that's also on the EHR is not only provider information, but also information for other providers that are working with the patients. So that's a lot of data that's being stored right now in an EHR system. So just a few statistics, about 96% of hospitals and 80% of United States physicians use the EHR systems. But in 2020, this year, about 29% of physicians are using cloud-based EHR systems. And the big problem they say of why they're not switching to cloud-based EHR systems is because they're afraid of the security risks that may be in the EHR systems and cloud. But with COVID times, a lot of things moving online, what we're seeing is a great projection of healthcare providers moving onto cloud, and that's a market value of about 55 billion by 2025. So really, what's the advantages of the healthcare systems? The big improvements are an improvement of quality, a larger scalability, and more flexibility for hospitals, doctors, and providers. But that comes with a few security risks and privacy risks that they're really afraid of, and that's where we're working to improve that. And we can see on the right, really what's being growing in the cloud is really telemedicine, right? Doctors being able to work with patients kind of one-on-one is a big thing because of even COVID, and that's actually spiking the increase in cloud growth for healthcare systems. But we have other areas like medical imaging, hospital administration, therapy, and etc. So really quickly, let's look at what regulations are in kind of the biosystem and really what we need to worry about here. In healthcare regulations, really the big thing is privacy, and this is really well controlled by HIPAA and GDPR. We also have regulations for IT systems, which are controlled really by high tech, medical devices by medical device regulations, which is MDR, and then clinical trials are controlled by GXP or good practice regulations. So what are some of the breaches that we're seeing in healthcare? So we took our time to really look through the Verizon Breach Report of 2020, which is kind of one of the most well-known breach reports, and specifically look at healthcare and what's being kind of the breaches that are being done in healthcare. So what we saw really, the biggest area was crimeware and then ransomware for medical information, but there's also other areas like web applications, privilege misuse, and so on. So in total, about 798 to be exact, breach incidents were reported within Verizon breach in the last year. And really the top controls that we want to point out that were in this breach was really the need for an implementation of a security awareness and training program, as well as data protection other recommendations. And so we also then went ahead and we said, okay, so a lot of HIPAA and GDPR requires providers to report breaches, specifically we wanted to focus on the United States. So what we did was we went to anybody can access this, the United States Department of Health and Human Services, their Office of Civil Rights. What they do is they provide kind of the breach report daily being updated, which are reported to them. So we did a few analysis. So let's dive into one day. This is just a picture from the most recent, but I took a case of just October 9th. And we can see here that there were 3 reports that were reported on October 9th, and we had different entities report on this day, health providers as well as other third-party business associates. And we can also find out what type of breach there were and where that location, that information is. But mainly let's focus on kind of how many individuals are being impacted, which is that number in the middle. So we did a little analysis on this, and we kind of came out to an average of 10 reports of breaches were reported per week. And the impact level per week was 49,000 people. And that's really big because this is just what is being reported in the United States following guidelines. There could be so many other breaches that are being not reported or not even aware. There's a lack of awareness within those breaches. So most of these breaches, again, are being reported by the providers, so doctors, hospitals, but a good amount, about 20%, is still coming from business associates and third-party workers that are involved in the EHR system. So now we want to move on to kind of medical devices. And in medical devices, we kind of divided it into two areas. One is implantable medical devices. That's going to be like pacemakers, insulin pumps, etc., that are implanted into the human body. But we also have another area which is getting more common, which are wearable technology devices that, such as Fitbits, Apple Watches, your phones, Google Glass. They're all tracking data information about you, whether it's heart rate to even your nutrition. So the big takeaways from this is that, first of all, implantable medical devices are FDA regulated, which is a good thing because a lot of the flaws within these systems are really fatal to health. You know, if someone hacks your cardiac pacemaker, they could be changing the pace of your blood flow, and that could be detrimental to you. But wearable devices are not FDA regulated, and that's really important because some of these flaws are in the compromising of the data. And what we see also is a lot of the collection of this data could be potentially even be sold to third parties, which is happening in the status quo, where big companies are selling off data to be analyzed or to be used for different progress reports and work. So let's really look again at the architecture of these two systems and then the threats that we have in it. So what we did was we looked at the different systems kind of across the board that were specifically for health systems in the cloud, and we kind of made a very simplistic model of that for you guys today. So we have here on the left, we have really the users such as the hospital and home, and how they're interacting with the cloud. We have third parties such as pharmacies, insurance companies, other labs, and then we have IT operants such as who are working to build and protect this cloud. So specifically at home, you know, your patients are going to be able to have access to IoT devices as well as their own laptops, own personal devices to get on the Wi-Fi to access their patient portal. Hospitals are going to use the doctor portal end where doctors and nurses can log into their own personal devices or the hospital devices onto EHR systems. And let's really look at, and really what's being stored here is really patient records, appointments, billings, scheduling, all this information that's really important and now is only being stored primarily in the cloud. So the threats that are involved here, we kind of broke it down, but really the big threats in the hospitals are doctors using personal devices as well as sharing their accounts. You know, I've worked a little bit in the system, interning at a few hospitals, and one common problem I saw was doctors were using kind of opening EHR portal systems on their own personal devices. There could be like a cross of information going from EHR systems that are supposed to be secure to an unsecure platform on your phone or your own personal device, which is a threat, as well as it's really common for a doctor and nurse who are working together to end up sharing accounts. And this also is a threat in itself because this could have, again, detrimental effects of how that data is being transferred to computers. And really, you lose the logging of who's actually accessing that data at that point. At home, a lot of patients aren't configuring their IoT devices or their Wi-Fi correctly, and that could lead to big threats there. Then within the system, at least as I was working in the hospital system, one big problem is availability with cloud. So if the cloud EHR system is down, that's going to slow down progress for doctors, but that's also going to make them lose availability to that system. And so that storage and that mechanism to get work done gets really slow and flawed. And then we also have a big problem with data loss. Again, we're only storing this on cloud. There's a potential of data loss. And we have a lot more threats associated with third party and IT. So like with third party, there could be integration issues within the system. And as well as with IT operants, it's really important to get the right privilege access within the cloud system so that they're not accessing information that's supposed to be private or for the patients and doctors only, as well as, you know, weak configuration of cloud, as well as other user devices identity issues. And yeah, that's pretty much, the architect and our threats.
Yeah, so one thing I want to emphasize here, right? So we spent some time, right? So this should help us to look at any of the health system in cloud, right? And point out what are the common threats, right? And generally we will focus on how to mitigate those threats architecturally by putting some processes and others, which we're going to be talking about.
Yeah. And so let's move a little more into the genomic research and some of the stuff I'm actually working on currently. So really by starting with what's biological and genomic research. So biological and genomic research really got famous in the 2000s from the Human Genome Project, which was aimed to study genes in the humans in the hope that we can understand how diseases work. And so the goals within the industry today are to do just that application, which is to identify treatments for specialized diseases based on genes, pharmaceutical development, and then a second sector that's actually growing is, you know, personal genome analysis. Like a lot of people will pay money to 21andMe, any other companies, and get kind of an understanding of what their genome has in them. And now a lot of this is being done in cloud because, again, it's easily computable in cloud compared to home-based systems. So currently the market stands at about 17.7 billion, but we can see that this projection to 2027 is about 31 billion. So again, a really large growing market. So let's talk about really why it's important for biomedical data breaches to be protected and why that's worse than a credit card leak. So when someone asks me, Muskan, why is it that my genome's so important? I say, okay, let me explain it to you this way. When we say that we have a credit card breach, we're like, oh, we're pretty disappointed. That's pretty bad because now we have to go get another credit card. That's going to cost us some money out of pocket, and it's going to take us 3 or 4 days to fix. But even worse than that is identity theft, right? Because identity theft means more work for a person, right? We have to go report that to 3 credit card companies, create an identity theft report. That hardship's going to take about a few weeks to even a month to resolve, so a lot more headache. But then let's get to DNA breaches. So if someone takes your DNA from you or takes your whole genome code, that's going to impact you because there's no replacement for your DNA. Your DNA is yours and yours alone. And that liability there could be your job, your health benefits, mortgage applications. When someone understands what could potentially be a problem for you later, that's going to impact some of these problems. And there's really no fix. And the hardship isn't just for you, but also your family and your progeny, because these people are going to have very similar DNA to you, and that could impact them in the long run. So again, that's why DNA breaches is really, really bad, and it's really important for us to protect that. So let's look at one of the breaches that which was by Vitigen, and again, why it's really important that we don't have problems like this in the future. So Vitigen had an exposure of about 3,000 customers' genome data just released, and that was really because they were using AWS in the cloud, and there was just a slight misconfiguration. But again, that impact to the customers is really vast. There's not going to be a replacement for that DNA if someone gets it into their hands and sells it off and to other entities, and that can impact them in the long run. And again, let's look at the architect and the threats for the bioinformatics systems as a whole. So again, we surveyed different architect models, and we created a very simple version to share with everybody today. So what we have on the left is really data that's coming in, and really what bioinformaticians are trying to do and researchers are trying to do is publish the results and the analysis on this. So along with that, they're bringing in different party codes, and really who's accessing this are researchers, students, and external collaborators that are working with them. So within this cloud specifically, what we have is 2 types of data, usually public data, so anything open source, as well as clinical data that's really important to secure properly. And that's really done in data ingestion aspect of de-anonymization and data identification. Then a lot of these researchers are also using third-party tools to do a lot of the analysis, as well as GitHub to bring in new source code and even store their own source code in the cloud. And a lot of the results then are being published based on analysis that is being done by genomics analysis, as well as DICOM images, which are medical images. And we also see a lot of these researchers nowadays using machine learning models. That's a really big thing. So image recognition, anomaly detection for doctors to really understand what's going on in diseases and to help their patients. So those are the big areas really. And what are the threats there? So again, biggest threat, some of the threats we see within the data itself is loss of privacy. So if we don't have de-identification, data anonymization, we'll talk how to do this a little better. That's going to present in loss of privacy for the patients and any other information there. Another big area, at least for bioinformaticians for me, is when we use third-party tools and we actually use GitHub and we're doing bash jobs, we might be using unpatched software. And that's really, really important to actually have patched software. So if you have researchers not using this correctly, that's going to have security problems within the cloud. As well as in GitHub, another problem is credential leakage. Oftentimes, things stored in GitHub have very private information that hasn't been removed by creators or users. So that's another threat right there. Again, we have cloud configuration issues. A third area is, and then we have a lot of loss of privacy, data privacy, and loss of intellectual property kind of towards 5, 6, and 7. And that's really important because for researchers, kind of most of our money, the big money, about 80% comes from intellectual property and the ideas that are developed from the analysis of data that we present in our research. And finally, when it comes to access control, if there's credential leakage from users, researchers, students, That's going to be another problem within the cloud, as well as confidentiality loss for users who are using this data.
Yeah, I'll add a few things here on this one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one is on the intellectual property loss, because at the end of the day, a lot of this research is expensive research, right? And we have seen a lot of the breaches which doesn't get reported because intellectual property is a loss to a business or to a research department, because they put a lot of PhDs, a lot of researchers do that, right? And we have seen those being stolen, right? Because that gives a country an edge, right? So that's another important thing for us to look at. And the other thing I will call out is, especially with new students, researchers coming in, right, who are using cloud in this form factor, what we have seen is looking at a lot of those breaches and a lot of things which can go wrong, where these researchers, students don't understand how to be using the cloud properly, how to be using, that's where you see the credential leakage and credential loss coming in, right? But at the end of the day, the most important thing is data sitting in the cloud, all your genomics images and the patient data sitting in the cloud. And we should be securing, especially from the confidentiality loss perspective. So hopefully those two models give us like 90% of the different systems, how they get architected in the cloud. So I'll take from here.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what we are going to be next talking about is, now given this area of bioinformations, and given some of the models which we have seen, right, how we mitigate the risk. So what we did was we drilled down into 5 different risk mitigation strategies for us, right? And to us, if you or if the users are following those strategies, they reduce the risk kind of considerably. 90% risk is gone, right? So we try to keep it simple, right? And a lot of that is based on my own working with the cloud, right, as well as some of the work which Muskan has been doing on bioinformatics. So first thing, right, we saw that privacy has been a big item, right? A lot of our regulations, GDPR, HIPAA, are around privacy. And the data which we are dealing with is personal data of a patient or someone, right? So privacy has to be at the top in all our decisions. So what we want to call out here is, you have to implement privacy by design. What it means is, you need to start with what exactly we are collecting, right? Are we collecting the minimal personal data, right? So if you're collecting some data, how much associated it is with the person, how we can de-anonymize it, do those different strategies. We need to be retaining. Sometimes we are using the data and how much it is retained. One of the mistakes which we have seen is, students or researchers may download the data not knowingly on their laptops or personal devices. We saw some examples where for convenience, nurses or doctors can be using personal devices. Those are some of the things that needs to be taught to them, or some controls need to be put in place, as well as kind of how this data gets sold to the third parties. So another important thing is, sometimes researchers may not know that a part of their research, even if it is getting published or they are sharing the data, who are taking those data? Is it properly de-anonymized, right? Are they passing some of the things which is not intended? Are the users who gave the data, or from where they got the data, has the right things before the data is passed to a third party? There's that's another very common mistake which goes on. And the last one here is how we ensure that the right encryption, right security mechanism is in place when we are storing this data. Because you will see that in the cloud, you will get kind of a lot of misnomers in the terms of, okay, it's encryption by default, right? So it's all encrypted and people just become happy because your G drive is encrypted by default. But what does it mean, right? In terms of, okay, maybe someone in the Google data center takeaway may not be able to see, but if you don't have proper access control, or your application is not doing security, your data could still be very easily stolen, right? Because at the top of it, when you're accessing it, it's not encrypted at that point, right? So those things need to be understood well. Now, when you build your privacy by design, what we've shown is that as part of the GDPR as well as the HIPAA regulations, we have certain things which needs to be aware, right? Where we notice goes into like, is this proper notice given to the individuals whose data is being analyzed and stored or done? Do we have the purpose, right? Sometimes the data is collected but given to a third party or researchers. Is it the purpose for which it's collected, right? Is it very clear, right? And the consent is received from the individuals before the data is shared. as well as few other areas if you look from IT perspective, proper security of the data, as well as when we are done with our work, how we remove the data, how we put it out, right? So those are some of the things which are driven rightly by a lot of the data protection regulations. Now, in terms of what's the workflow which we need to be using, right? So any data coming in, it's important for the researchers to understand the data, understand the privacy implications of it, right? So that they can make like some sort of privacy chart on, okay, this is the data element and that's the privacy level it has and other things. And then they need to be having the appropriate security controls around it, right? If they have certain sensitive data they're dealing with, they need to have restrictions in place that this cannot be copied here, versus sometimes the data is open source data, right, which may not have those restrictions. That get followed by what we call a monitoring and management, right? This is where we need to be enabling logging, monitoring in the cloud so that we know who is accessing this data. And if anything wrong happens, like a breach happens, it's easy to identify that the breach happened and who did it and all those details. Now, once we have kind of the second principle here, which needs to be kept in mind is especially understanding the encryption, obfuscation, anonymization correctly. When we were surveying some of the research, some of the breaches, many times the anonymization, obfuscation is done very wrong, right? There are multiple papers where someone claimed that it's already obfuscated data, but the researchers were able to kind of go back and still get all the personal details from the data because it was not properly obfuscated, right? So understanding exactly the right algorithms, right mechanisms to be used for obfuscation is important. And then the encryption side of things, right? So we generally, as a security practitioners, we think about, okay, encryption at rest, encryption at in kind of when it's going over the network, right? So in the transport. So we need to be understanding all that and wherever it is being stored, right? So another thing I keep on emphasizing here is, if people are not trained properly, they may not know kind of taking the data and storing on their laptops and other personal devices, not knowing the sensitivity of those data they're dealing with this in this research. A third one, since we're dealing with the cloud here, right? So one thing which is important to understand the shared responsibility model. So I think most of you who have been working with the cloud probably have heard that term, right? This is where cloud providers will say, okay, this is what I'm responsible for security versus this is what as you as a tenant is responsible. So so that's kind of very important to understand, because sometimes it gets marketed as, okay, clouds are secure and it's everything is taken care, which is not correct. So you need to understand based on your model what is the security. Now when we looked into the HIPAA actually makes cloud provider as a business associate, right? So they have certain responsibilities, but as kind of the team who is building this product or building the system, they are responsible for a lot of part of the security. Let's actually, just as an example, let's dig deeper into the guideline paper published by AWS, right? On if you're implementing a GXP based system, that means a system which is handling clinical trials, labs, and other patient information. This is what they have kind of shared, right? And not going into the details of this, what I want to emphasize is, if you look at kind of what they said, customer responsibility in blue, it's 90% of the things are customer responsibility, right? And but you see the AWS responsibility is in the gray, right? Certain things, certain services which they're running, they're responsible for securing it. But lot of things happen, right, that needs to be done correctly. So even if you're going in, the key thing here is, even if you're going in the cloud, don't assume that, okay, clouds are secure, right? So you need to understand the responsibility model, do all the things in place to secure it, all the different points, right, which we're talking about here, and which we probably learned even in our threat modeling. The fourth thing which keeps on coming back, right, and you probably saw in the breach report also saying as the number one point, to have proper security training programs, especially when we have individuals from a new field such as research, such as biomedical field coming in. They need to be trained how to use the IT systems correctly, especially when the systems are running on cloud or in the public domain. They need to be running correctly so that individuals can um, understand, right, how to handle the biomedical data. And obviously all the associated individuals with those projects, right? So obviously when the applications are running, they're being operated, some of the health record systems are running, right? Associated administrators, IT teams need to be knowing. And Muskan gave some examples based on her work also that she has seen in the real life medical staff sharing credentials, not kind of understanding that they cannot access those, right? Because with the cloud, it becomes so easy, right? Even if they have restrictions with the cloud, it becomes so easy that, okay, I can kind of access it from anywhere on my personal devices and other things, right? And then they take the liberty to do it, right, for convenience. And those are the things which needs to be trained, right, to those individuals, especially if they're using the personal devices, then it has to meet certain criteria or certain conditions before they can use it, right, for these medical records. The fifth one, right, which I try to combine a lot of the security operational practices that needs to be done correctly for these systems in the cloud, right? Starting from having a secure configuration. We saw one of the DNA breach, right, which has the AWS configurations not done correctly. Some of the very basic fundamental things. And actually, if you dig through that, you will see that that configuration was misconfigured for almost 3 years, right, before they noticed it, right? So for 3 years, those records were accessible or vulnerable, right? And they even don't know how they have, how many people have breached it because they didn't have proper logging and monitoring in place. So starting from having a strong operation, cloud operations, starting from hardening your systems, keeping it patched, because another thing which you see is some of the students, researchers bring in this open source software. They may not know that it is kind of unpatched or older version, or there's a known security vulnerabilities for the third party software. They don't realize it, right? And those are all the things that should come in mind, right? Should be trained to them that they need to be now responsible for patching those systems which they bring in the cloud and running it. So obviously running the vulnerability scans, right, helps us to look at what's going on. I talked about monitoring and logging. I just want to emphasize that, right, because those are ears and eyes to any system. If we don't have proper logging monitoring, if something wrong happens, we can't even investigate or can't figure it out what exactly happened or who got the data and other things, right? So it's like a ears and eyes for us, right? So one is it doesn't give us it's hard for us to get any answers if a breach happens, right? As well as sometimes we are even unaware that breach happens. To that example, right, where we are seeing around 49,000 patients across United States losing their health related information on a weekly basis. That's a big figure, right? And then if we don't, and there may be so many more, right, so many more which are probably not reported, or providers are not even aware of that, right? So that's another key thing. The last one here is the breach notification process, because as part of the GDPR, and it requires you should have a breach notification process. Actually, that HHS portal which we saw was part of it, right? Because someone got a breach and they need to notify those authorities, right? So that process need to be kind of known to everyone, right? So that they are ready when the actual breach happens, they can report it within the time. So the next part of it is what we have seen with the cloud is we have a lot of sometimes you've shown kind of one cloud, but you get a lot of integrations, right? So you get third-party clouds where you're sharing it. You have third-party integrations with pharmacy, with other labs and others, so your data is passing. So you end up using a lot of APIs, a lot of integration credentials in the cloud. So it's very important to understand, right? Starting from the actual users who are using it, how they're securely logging into the cloud, how they're changing their credentials, how they're using kind of proper bash and host or jump servers to go in, not kind of opening up all the ports and other things for just convenience because it's convenient and it makes their life easier, right? Versus they need to take those precautions since they're running things in the cloud. Another issue which we see again and again, right, is embedding the credentials in code and using GitHub and Git repos being the code get pushed in that, right, along with the credentials. And the next thing you see is someone using the credentials to log in into the cloud and getting all the data, or sometimes even abusing the cloud by running coin mining or taking away the resources for free, right? So those kind of activities are becoming increasingly there, right, because of the credential leak. And the APIs are part of it, right? Because in any of those architecture, there's a lot of use of APIs everywhere, right? So how we store those APIs correctly, how we keep on rotating it, all those are some of the important things which are need to be there as we build our systems in the cloud. Now I'll pass to Muskan to summarize it.
Yeah, sure. Sure. So again, the big key takeaways from our presentation today really was to explain the growing field, which is cyberbiosecurity, which is being built basically based on the growing need of medical in the medical and research sectors to in terms of higher outputs of data, as well as increase of different types of research growths. Then also the increased use of cloud computing, as it's much more easier, it's cheaper, and it's more flexible for medical and researchers. And then also we also have continuous technological development, such as IoT devices, which we're continuing to come up with new innovative ideas to be able to track medical information for patients as well as just everyday users. And so this really makes it important for us to be doing cybersecurity properly in the biological field. But then after that, we identify the threats within the different systems, specifically in the hospital as with medical devices and patients, and then also in biological research within the cloud. And then finally, we summed it up by kind of providing you with really big 5 mitigation strategies that should be implemented within biological research as well as the field of medicine to really be able to make sure that we're securing at least the cloud that we're using today. And that's kind of what we have. So at this time, we'll take questions. We've kind of left contact information in the slide, just if you have any questions in the future to reach out to us with.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We do have a few questions. We have 3, so we'll go ahead and address those. If anybody else has any other questions, go ahead and please put those in the Q&A section. We have a good bit of time here where we can have a nice Q&A. So the first one here is, does OCR have oversight with biological and genomic research similar to other PHI? With fines, etc.
So OCR is the recognition thing, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you know the answer? I'm not.
So can you repeat the question, Derek?
Yes. So does OCR have oversight with biological and genomic research similar to other PHI with fines, etc.?
So it is kind of, I'll try to answer it, right? So OCR, to me, at the end of the day, we need to understand the fine and regulations is based on the data, right? So OCR is a technology. It's kind of how you give your documents and it reads it, right? Now, that document could be someone's biopsy or someone's actual medical record and other things. To me, the fines and security is based on what is the data, and the OCR is just a technology, right? At the end of the day, if you're using medical records, patient records to be scanned, right, it has the similar regulations that will be applicable to them, right? So which is applicable to any of the HIPAA patient data. So regardless of the technology, so once you get that. Yeah, you want to add anything?
And so so with biological and genomic research specifically, I would say it's more of, I feel like the analysis, at least from what I know from the biological standpoint, is done more with third-party tools, less with OCR. I'm not sure if you know more about that.
I think generally in the medical practice, because you probably are she is dealing more with the research, right? A
Right.
lot of the patient, a lot of the hospitals still take the handwritten notes from the doctors and they send it, right? So generally nurse or someone will compile all their notes and send to the OCR system so that they can be uploaded in the health systems.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, to me, it's a patient data, right? So the same regulations apply regardless of it's a handwritten thing or it's in an electronic format.
Sure.
And they clarified the OCR. They said by OCR I meant Office of Civil Rights.
Oh, okay, I see. So yeah, we've been answering the wrong question, I see. Yeah. So I guess just to confirm, so you're asking, does the Office of Civil Rights have oversight on biological and genomic research compared to medical? And that's actually not true. They don't have, and correct me if I'm wrong, they don't have oversight on biological genomic research. That's more done with GXP, which is the good practice regulations. So OCR is really focused more on HIPAA and GDPR's requirement to collect the reports in terms of breaches.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Great question. Great answer. So our next question, this is a good one. With the correct know-how Let me see. With the correct know-how, just getting a hair from someone allow that actor to get their DNA. So, okay, with the correct know-how, how does just getting a hair from someone allow that actor to get their DNA?
Okay, this is a pretty biological question, right? How, so pretty much as summarized, I think you're asking if I had a piece of hair from, I guess, anybody, could I get their DNA, right? And the answer is technically, yes, you can. Now I can get into the schematics of how technically hair is made out of dead cells. So you would need kind of really certain part of the hair to get the actual DNA and everything. But yes, it is possible. The problem with genomic analysis and that we face today is kind of whole genome sequencing, which means me taking the whole genome from a cell and computing that out is computationally really intensive and costs thousands of dollars just for one run. A lot of what we see in terms of how a personal user can get their DNA ran by different companies is that companies actually looking at certain sites within your DNA, and that makes it computationally much more faster and feasible to do for personal level. So I say yes, it is possible. You would need the right tech, and usually I don't think just a normal person is going to have the right technology to run all that data. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. Okay, and the last question that we have so far, and again, if there are other questions, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A section. This question is from an anonymous attendee. Can you explain more on the liability with no real way for a person to protect their DNA? So can you
Um,
explain more on the liability with no real way for a person to protect their DNA?
So I guess this could be from, I guess, certain different levels, right? So I guess what we focus more on is if a company has access to your DNA or a hospital has access to your DNA. So such as maybe I paid 21andMe to run my whole an analysis on my DNA. So technically they have all of that information about me. And yes, so if they get breached, after I've paid them and I've gotten my information, there's no paperwork that really happens where I can say, I want to make sure that after you run my DNA, I can get that information can disappear from the world and from your system. That's not how that works for the company. That company actually gets to store that information in the status quo and could potentially be selling that off to other companies. And we've seen problems with this in the last few years. So in that sense, yes, you again have any way to protect your own information when you give that to companies, except for saying, hey, I'm never going to give any of my genomic information to company. But then at a personal level, right? So with the last example, so technically if I have a hair of someone, I want to run that information, get the whole genome. If that information is ran, stored by someone against, that's not, you don't have any, personal ability to take that information back as well. So I think to answer your question, the liability factors at both a company level. So if you give your information to anybody, whether it's a hospital or third party company, also liability is within yourself if someone gets access to your DNA and your genome. But I think the second part, the more personal level, is a little more complicated and kind of nuanced, not really done today.
Okay.
You have anything to add?
All right. And we have another question that's come in. Do you consider data from wearable devices to be secure when transmitted via Bluetooth?
Do you want to take this question? I'm going to say no, but I feel like you can explain it better.
Yeah. Okay. So here is if technically, right, to me the Bluetooth, it depends on what version of the Bluetooth software you're using, right? It goes to the basic principle of the data in motion, right? So this is a data in motion when it is going through Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or going through anywhere, right? So now newer Bluetooth standards, right, have all encryption built in, right, that negotiates the encryption between the endpoints. So that's kind of, to me, that will be secure, right, during the encryption. But as a security practitioner, I'll worry more about what happens on the other device, right? If the data is going from here, if there's a malware, not on the Bluetooth, right, as a protocol, but more on the device which is negotiating that, right? So if I have a speaker, right, and someone can put malware on the speaker, right, I'll be more worried about the speaker itself, right, unpatched or passing it rather than the Bluetooth standard itself, right? So
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Good, good. Are there any other questions? I don't see any others here. We did have another comment that we were just saying, great presentation. So the feedback is great. But oh wait, I think we have another question here. Okay, here we go. Let me make sure I'm tying this back. So they said, sorry, this was in relation to one of the other questions. Sorry, the question was more towards the mortgage companies, etc. How will losing a person's DNA cause them to lose their mortgage? Unless you are saying some companies are using DNA as an identity.
Okay, so pretty much where when we're saying companies have access to your genetic information or DNA, what they're not going to care about, the certain aspect of what's in your DNA specifically. What they're going to care about is what that information is telling them from a genomic standpoint, which DNA can tell us what is the likelihood of you getting certain diseases and how that's going to impact your lifestyle, as well as different outputs of yourself as a person. So that means that from your DNA information, like for mine, say if I ran my DNA, I could potentially understand I might have risk to certain diseases such as diabetes, heart disease, or maybe even special cases like Parkinson's disease, or schizophrenia, which are mental health disorders that show up usually at later endpoints of my life. So if a company is able to get the analysis of this information, which tells them what type of diseases or what my lifestyle is going to look like in the next 20 years, that could projectly impact how much my insurance, what insurance companies would want to, give me insurance. So if they think, oh, this person has a risk of getting cancer, maybe we don't want to insure this person's health. That's going to either make them may have to pay more money. They're going to give me a much more expensive package, or they're going to say, sorry, we cannot insure you. Same thing with mortgage. Technically, anybody can hire lower your prices based on that information. And that's really what we're trying to get into when we say that, if someone has access to your DNA, that information, that analysis is what's going to really could potentially impact you as a person out in the world.
Oh,
Yeah.
All right. Great answer. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense as well. So I don't see any other questions. Let me just double check. Oh, wait a minute. Nope. Every time I say that, another one comes in. You're giving some great answers here. So we'll keep on going. We still have time. So this is great. So the next question is, should that not be information those companies should be receiving through other than the place you went to? So let me say that again. Should that not be information those companies should be receiving, though?
Yes, yeah. Let me try this. Let me see if I get it right. So here is the whole. I'll say the catch of different regulations are always catching to what is happening, right? So if you look at GDPR, right? So it's not that GDPR was not issued 15, 20 years back, right? The privacy has been an issue, right? We all know stories about WordBar 2 and how the privacy was kind of misused to do so many bad things to certain individuals. So these regulations catch up, right? So what we are trying to say here is now certain companies which are kind of taking your DNA samples and other things, right, today may not kind of abide by all the regulations because those regulations are not clear, or there are loopholes, right, where they may be getting it from you and charging you just 19.99, right? But they may be selling that information to third parties for hundreds of dollars, right? And that generally, even for privacy and other things, that's one of the risk factor. So what we're trying to say here is, yes, it should be like that, right? If someone gets your information, you should only be giving, and that's where the whole privacy consent and other things come in, right? You should only give the consent to them to just use it for that only purpose. They should not be selling it. But many times in those fine lines, it's hidden, right? How they're kind of taking that thing and others. So agreed with you. Ideally, once you do that, they should not be getting from third parties. But we all know what happens, right, in the advertisement field. If you go back, right, the reason kind of, if I buy something, next day I'm checking my Gmail and advertisement related to that will come up, right? So there is something happening in the background, right? That information is getting passed. So hopefully over the time, for some of these sensitive things, there'll be more regulations, there'll be less chances, right? And some of these companies may get fined, but that will catch up, right? That's not, since cyber biosecurity, all this is very new field. I don't think it's like that today. You want to add?
Yeah, so completely agree. Again, I think the big takeaway, right, is that yes, I think in terms of companies risking and giving out that information, that's not supposed to be done. But the reality is, if there's a risk, if there's a breach, that company can't really do anything about that information getting leaked out, and that information could be misused. And then again, yes, a company could be potentially even selling that information to third parties, which we're seeing currently right now.
All right. Any other questions? I'm gonna pause a minute because
Sure.
I say that we get another great question. All right, well, let's have a big round of applause. Let's clap in the chat. We still have most of our audience is still here and listening to the great Q&A. So great presentation. I do not see any more questions, so I think we are done with the Q&A. Again, thank you once again. This was very informative, and I know will be a presentation that's watched heavily after once we publish and stream the presentations from the conference. So thank you for being a panelist today, and hope you get a chance to enjoy some more presentations yourself and everybody else in the final